Hello and welcome back to week 15 of MC 100. You've done it. You've made it. We're at our last lecture of the semester. Congratulations. You guys have worked really hard this semester, and I'm very proud of everything that you've learned. If you go back and look at even our final exam review, because it's comprehensive, just think about how much you have learned about mass communication in just a few short weeks, even though they have felt like a decade because hashtag 2020. But you guys have done some amazing work this semester, and I'm very proud of the progress that this class has made. So, this is our last lecture video, and it will be on the history of public relations in America. Now, public relations, again, is when you're trying to influence the public, not through advertisements that you pay for, but by influencing public opinion and attitudes using third parties. And so the denim industry actually had to do this in the 50s thanks to rock and roll culture. Now, jeans were, of course, seen as a symbol of rock and roll, but they were also a symbol of, youth acting out and not being culturally appropriate. And, imagine just when you had to wear slacks all the time, and then all of a sudden you got these jeans and they're super cool, but the parents and the administrators are like, oh, that's rock and roll culture, these are bad kids. And so, what the parents and administrators at local high schools were doing, they were actually outlawing jeans from being allowed in schools or organizations. Some restaurants even wouldn't serve people who were wearing jeans because it was just seen as this symbol of bucking society. And so the denim industry saw a huge decline when this happened in jean sales in about the mid 50s. And so they were using advertisements, but they were recognizing that advertisements were really meant to get teenagers to buy jeans. But the real source of this decline in their sales was parents, it was administrators, it was the community leaders who were telling these kids that they couldn't wear jeans. And so the denim council decided to begin using PR tactics to promote jeans as culturally appropriate and accessible. And so they would host things like a Jean Queen contest at local malls or shopping centers, where they would have moms come and see who wore it best, kind of thing, and they'd have competitions for Jean Queens. And then in 1961, the Denim Council agreed to outfit all of the Peace Corps volunteers who were working around the world and actually provided denim to a lot of underserved countries. And this got a lot of press and media attention as this, kind philanthropic event where American denim was being spread around the world, kind of thing. And so by 1963, not because of an increase in advertising by any means, but because of PR promotions and swaying public opinion about the appropriateness and the values of denim to America, jean sales began to skyrocket in 1963 and have remained extremely popular until probably the past 5 to 10 years. And of course, they still are popular. But leggings are so much more comfortable. So a lot of that has declined. But that is just one example of what makes PR so special, that without spending any real money, the Denim Council was able to turn around an idea of denim being a threat to America to becoming a symbol of American fashion. Now, press agents in very early American culture were known for using the media to promote entertainment, to promote certain aspects of American life. And P.T. Barnum, who, of course, is famous for his circus and performing acts, used exaggeration, fraudulent stories, and stage events to try to get newspaper coverage for his circus so that he wouldn't have to pay for advertising. And this is why his circus performers became national celebrities. You could say, the world's strongest man, and you know that you're talking about P.T. Barnum's act. Unfortunately, while The Greatest Showman is a wonderful movie and one of my favorite musicals, it really doesn't portray this fraudulent side of P.T. Barnum as a press agent, but he was extremely good at it. Now, another very famous press agent was William F. Cody, who was known as Buffalo Bill. And Buffalo Bill actually utilized 9 different press agents to promote the Wild West and Western American culture. And these 9 press agents included John Burke, a very famous writer. And Burke used a wide variety of media channels to begin generating publicity. He employed Annie Oakley and Sitting Bull in order to get coverage of the Wild West in newspapers, magazines, advertisements, dime novels, theaters, posters, and even films. And so it really created this idea of when we think about the Wild West, a lot of that concept, that attitude, the values associated with it were generated by William F. Cody and his press agents. Now, big businesses began using public relations in terms of trying to get around government regulations or the adoption of certain government policies to help their business and create monopolies on their products. So, railroads were known for doing this. They used press agents to obtain federal funding for rail line expansion. And this was primarily done through the use of lobbyists who were utilizing PR tactics to convince politicians to adopt rail as the major transportation mode for government dealings. Now, agents were known for using bribes and deadheading. And deadheading is when the railroad or their press agents would provide free rail passes to journalists, but it was with the understanding that those journalists would then uh, write favorable reports in the media as well as to their local politicians about their experiences on trains. And lobbying eventually led to the Interstate Commerce Act in 1881, which drove many businesses to other transportation methods. Now, lobbying continues to be a very important aspect of government culture. AT&T used it to create a telephone monopoly until the 1980s when higher government regulation on monopolies were created. But lobbyists are still very, very active in our political life in America. And this is primarily how many politicians during government campaigns and candidacy campaigns are able to take in money from special interest groups. And so it's very important to consider the ways that PR and particularly lobbying can influence government and political culture. Now, Ivy Ledbetter Lee was one of the early pioneers of PR as an actual profession, going beyond just those press agents to get coverage into thinking about it more as an industry. And Lee was really known for utilizing the media in an honest and direct way. And so instead of using the fraudulent stories like Barnum would, he would actually tell the press exactly what was going on during crises in order to make the company seem more favorable to the press and therefore the public. And so a lot of companies were realizing that the more that they could be associated with positive public images and values, the better they would sell their products. The problem was that Lee wanted to use facts and honesty, but he viewed them as malleable, that you could twist facts to present it or frame a situation in a certain way, even when it could be viewed as very negative in another. And there were 2 famous incidents of this. In 1906, Lee was hired by the Pennsylvania Railroad after one of their electric trains crashed and killed many people. And it received a lot of bad publicity that was going to hurt the railroad industry. So the Pennsylvania Railroad hired Lee to essentially be a fixer for this situation. And, the Pennsylvania Railroad was trying to hide this incident from journalists, which only made them want to go and investigate it more. So Lee told them to have an open relationship with the press. He actually had the railroad drive. With the train, drive the journalist out to the scene, allowed them to go and walk the scene. You can see them standing on the bridge. They're exposed to everything. And what this did was it allowed Lee and the Pennsylvania Railroad to control all the messaging about this incident because the journalists were being provided with spokespeople and representatives who were using the organization's stance on what happened in order to create more favorable coverage. And this was actually the first press release ever done in America. Now, in 1914, Lee was hired by John D. Rockefeller, who, of course, is a giant of industry, after a strike in Colorado. There were miners who were camped out and they were on strike for poor living conditions. They were living in tent communities, being underpaid. The hygiene and the health of those living in these miner communities were just terrible. And of course, Rockefeller is known for driving production, but not in a socially responsible way. Well, in 1914, the National Guard came upon one of these mining camps. And for whatever reason, they were trying to regulate those who were living in the camps. And the National Guard actually ended up shooting at people living in these tent cities. Well, the women and children hid in their tents to avoid the gunshots, and the National Guard went and set fire to these tents to help drive them out of the community. In total, 53 workers, including 13 women and children, died in this event. And of course, this looks very bad for Rockefeller, who's already known for poor working conditions. And so Lee would issue fact sheets, set up photo opportunities, and really try to paint Rockefeller and the company in a much better light. And he would do things like have Rockefeller, who's this, huge pioneer of American industry, and he'd go to these mining camps and hand out dimes to the children for a photo op so that it didn't make him seem like this terrible person. Instead, Rockefeller became this caring and generous person, and that actually would go on to become Rockefeller's legacy. Was through these photo opportunities and philanthropic events, Rockefeller was known for being very generous after the influence of Lee and PR professionals. Now, another pioneer of the PR industry is Edward Bernay. He was actually Sigmund Freud's nephew. And so, because of his background, having, the famous psychologist Sigmund Freud as in his family, he was one of the first people to apply psychology and sociology into how you can sway public opinion about events. He was the one that coined the phrase engineering consent, which means that you are not telling people what to buy, you're telling them how to buy it. And you're giving the audience is giving you permission to influence their opinion on something. And that really is the foundation of what PR does. Now, he was known as a public relations counselor and was one of the first to really turn this into a profession in the sense that he taught the very first PR class at NYU in 1923 and wrote the very first textbook on PR called Crystallizing Public Opinion. He had some of the largest clients in the world at the time, like GE, GM, Good Housekeeping, Time Magazine, Procter and Gamble, RCA, and even the entire government of India, and ran President Coolidge's campaigns. So Bernay was an extremely influential member of the PR world. In terms of his impact on American culture, Bernays was very active on the Committee on Public Information, which operated during World War One, and he developed a lot of the propaganda pieces that supported America entering into World War Two. Once we went into I'm sorry, not World War II, World War One. Once we began fighting in World War One, then Bernays moved his propaganda to promoting the president in the image of a peacemaker, so that it didn't make him seem like he was this wartime president, but instead we were in this war to create peace. And that became, one of the primary images that presidents want to have during wartime incidents. Now, in the 1920s, Bernays also created a campaign for the American Tobacco Company to encourage women to begin smoking as a symbol of their independence. They had just gained the right to vote through suffrage. And so Bernays was responsible for the Torches of Freedom campaign, which would suggest that women were holding torches of freedom in cigarettes, lighting up their independence and showing how they had won suffrage. Now, of course, Bernays was aware of the damage that tobacco could cause. He, in fact, would not allow his own wife to smoke because he knew of the harmful effects. But he was very effective in getting more women to smoke during the 1920s throughout the until about the 1960s, and became a really large part of why smoking was such an integral part of American culture at the time. Now, here's a quote from Bernays. Public relations is the attempt by information, persuasion, and adjustment to engineer public support for an activity, cause, movement, or institution. And so this really shows how this is a social science. It utilizes psychology, persuasion, as well as communication in order to generate support from the public and not from the company itself. Now, an important aspect of PR history, Bernays, of course, is a huge influence on PR life in America. But it's important to note that Doris Fleshman, who worked for Bernays, was one of the first women in PR. She was the first woman in PR, period. But she was such a pioneer, working side by side with Bernays, and actually produced a pamphlet for the industry called Contact that was very influential, that it really opened the field to women. And today, over 60% of the PR field is female, because it was one of the first career tracks that women truly had other than education and nursing. And so a lot of the influence of gender representation within PR is due to Doris Fleshman and her integral work with Bernays. So that is our very last lecture. Again, congratulations. You guys have done so much work this semester, especially during a very difficult semester. So I'm very, very proud of you. Make sure that you watch the guest speaker interview with Honora, who is a PR representative for a local church, and just hear what it's like in the life of a PR professional. In addition, you'll need to do your discussion post for the week, which includes PR in the press, responding to crisis, and then asking any questions you may have about the final exam. I have provided a final exam review sheet. As a reminder, the final is on Monday, December 7th. It opens at 12 a.m. and will close at midnight that same night. The final is cumulative. And the reason for this is that we are only taking the top 3 grades out of all 4 exams. You only have 3 of your exams count. And so if you did not perform to your standard on the first 3 exams, you can certainly take the 4th exam. However, we're wanting to prove that you have done the work throughout the semester in order to replace one of those first 3 grades. So not only will we cover advertising and PR, but we will also cover the content from exams 1, 2, and 3. Now, the final exam is optional. If you feel that your grade is where you want it to be, and you performed well on the first 3 tests, you are not required to take the final exam. So that is perfectly up to you. If you would like to discuss that with me, that is perfectly fine as well. You will not hurt your grade if you make a lower grade on the final than the first 3 exams. I'll just drop the final grade. So again, it is your decision as to whether you want to take the final or not. Um, in addition, make sure that you finish the media consumption project. This was where you're doing your media log and writing your summary about it. Make sure you do all 3 parts. That will be due Wednesday, December 9th at midnight. However, if you're a graduating senior, meaning you're trying to walk for the December commencement ceremony, please make sure that you get this to me no later than Monday, December 7th, because I need to turn in your grades prior to you being able to graduate and walk. So please keep that in mind if you are a graduating senior. Otherwise, the project is due Wednesday, December 9th. I hope you guys have a wonderful rest of your semester. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions whatsoever. And of course, I am always here for you, regardless of whether you're a mass communication major or not. If you ever need help during your time at Montevallo or in trying to transition to your career, I'm happy to serve as a mentor and someone who is here to support you. So please feel free to reach out at any time and have a wonderful rest of your semester.